Well, today is the 22nd of August 2019. I'm just getting over the shock of hearing about the death of former Prime Minister Tim Fischer, and I'm going to play something in relation to that and make a few comments because I was only speaking to him very, very recently.
Learn that you've been facing a few health battles recently. How's that faring?
Thanks for asking. I'm getting there. Great people at Albury Cancer Centre, Royal Melbourne Hospital, and Peter Mack. So I've got acute leukemia. So I'm in a form of remission, but I've got further treatments coming in January. It didn't prevent me having a swim at Bronte Beach this morning. That was a great tonic. It won't prevent me being at Abbey Bookshop this afternoon at 3:30. So life goes on. You build. But it's been a diagnosis that's caused me to do a lot of thinking and give something back. And good writing, I think, is giving something back. The book is back in many ways. Book sales are up in the USA by 2%.
What was the most
and
important thing you said it got you thinking? What was paramount in your mind when you were diagnosed?
Well, enjoy every day with the family.
Yes,
enjoy
I've
every day
too.
that comes along, because every day is an extra day. To put it simply, and do things you like doing. And heading off with Harrison and Judy yesterday to across the valley, beautiful green valley, to the local church service was a particular delight at Dettering, and that's on every couple of weeks. But equally, we're looking forward to a great family Christmas.
And that is your beautiful boy, Harrison.
There he is, yes.
You and your gorgeous wife Judy spoke on Australian Story about him.
All right, well, I'll talk a bit more. I'll have some more, obviously, some up-to-date footage. This was taken some time ago.
Got yourself a movie then.
And Dominic works his way through cars.
And, well, I'll obviously be talking about that now.
Living with autism.
Now, well, obviously, this is a very much an amateur tribute, let's say, or a little movie discussing Tim Fischer, who's now passed away today. A number of things can be said, and I suppose it's best to say or start with the fact that only quite recently I contacted the LNP, the Liberal National Party in Queensland, and in turn they passed on my phone number to Tim Fischer, and I said in my message to the LNP that we have a number of things in common. I didn't mention the cancer, but I said our political views, the fact that I'm conservative as he was, and that we're great railway enthusiasts, and that we follow the Sydney Swans football team. So we had those things in common, and plus we had the cancer in common, as I've had it twice. I've just mentioned that on my post in Facebook, and I'll say it again here now. I'm still somewhat in shock, but in a way not surprised, because what happened was Tim rang me, just the other day really, just very recently, last couple of weeks. And what happened there was I just was working here like I am now on the computer, and the phone rang, and I knew the voice instantly, of course, and he said, "Oh, is that John Coyle?" "Yes." Well, this is Tim Fischer here from Southern New South Wales." I said, "Oh, g'day Tim, thanks for ringing." We talked about trains, and we talked about railway museums and things we, just discussed. Fairly brief, few minutes worth of discussion, and he mentioned about the cancer treatment that he was having, and I mentioned about chemotherapy being a 97% failure rate. He said, "Well, Some people say that, and you know, that's online, and there's all sorts of talk like that. And I'm continuing with the treatment. And I said, well, all the best with that. But I felt in my heart, and I still feel now, almost in the point of tears at times here now, that chemotherapy is a death sentence. We've lost our very wonderful friend Dom from church recently to chemo. She had cancer, but they insisted on that treatment, and it's as I said, a 97% failure rate. We have another friend who has Elise, who in McCulloch, who is Paul McCulloch's wife. They live in Gosford, New South Wales, and he was a pastor for many years here, and he's a pastor down there in New South Wales. A wonderful couple, by the way, but she survived chemotherapy. She had breast cancer, I think, and anyway, she got through it. But it was targeted, I assume, was targeted just on that particular area, and it was a success. But with and Tim Fischer having he had a very, very bad form of cancer. But there are various treatments, and I'd urge anybody to start looking them up. And I just put I can't think of the name of it right now, but one of our other good friends, Julie Boyle, put the name of a natural substance that does in fact cure cancer. Now, of course, people scoff and carry on and no, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, it's anecdotal. They carry on with all sorts of nonsense, you know. But I can tell you that and I can tell you about apricot kernels will work. And my former brother-in-law took apricot kernels, and he got through the cancer and it cured him. Danny Burns up from Cairns. He's in his mid-70s, I think, now, and he's quite well. And there are a number of stories about people who have taken alternative medications and they've survived quite well. And I'm not going to go long-winded into some of the issues we have with our own granddaughter that's being treated at the moment. Would you believe, with honey, rather than a medication that's related to chemo, which we refused, as to say their parents, which is our son-in-law Joel and our daughter Kathleen wisely refused that. But I'd like now, just for a moment anyway, just to talk about Tim Fischer. As I said, I have spoken to him, very, very happy to have done so. I told him a couple of things, and as I mentioned, that I read his book, and he talked about my late mother's great uncle, who was Billy Wentworth. And Billy was obviously a rail enthusiast, not quite as openly and as obvious as Tim Fischer is. But the situation regarding Billy, there's so many stories about him which I won't go into right now, but one of them is that he named the Southern Aurora, which was a great train that we used to have between Sydney and Melbourne, which we sadly miss. And he was wanting to ride the first service, and he couldn't get a pair in Parliament. He was a member of Parliament, Liberal Party, and he was at one time Minister for Transport. And anyway, his wife and many others came to Sydney and got on the train, and Billy couldn't get a pair, as I said, in Parliament. So what happened was, when Parliament finished, he obviously took a car, someone drove him down to Yass. The train should be non-stop, only for crew purposes in Goulburn and Albury, and it was, for all intents and purposes, a non-stop express train, but it picked Billy up in Yass and took him to Melbourne on the inaugural service in 1962. So that's one little piece of family history that I'm just sort of creeping in there and just describing to you. So it must run in the blood or something, because he must have been a rail enthusiast. But now, in the case of Tim, We talked about railway museums, such as I said, like I've been to York, and he said, as you have, and he said, oh, John, if you get a chance and go to Adelaide, go to the National Railway Museum, which I said, oh, Tim, I've already been to that, and he said, it's a great museum, it's up there with museums like York. I said, oh yes, in its own way, yes, it's pretty good. And I said, now one of the most important things, and I'll say this again, put it on the public record, is that I have many friends who are rail enthusiasts. Some are supporters of his side of politics, which is Conservative, or he was the National Party, and Tim, by the way, was much criticised, and nasty comments were made about him even by former Prime Minister Paul Keating, and hopefully he would apologise now, or say something decent now that Tim has passed away. But all the same, he was wounded in the Battle of Coyle in Vietnam, by the way. That was one of Australia's biggest battles in the Vietnam War. Tim worked tirelessly to bring about the Alice Springs to Darwin Railway, and there's been suggestions today, and I think it should be taken seriously, that they should either name that railway or any high-speed railway that we ever build between Sydney and Melbourne, the Tim Fischer Railway. He was a wonderful man in that regard, and I must tell one final story before closing, let's say, on the subject. I read his book, and I read another book called The Boy from Borey Creek, which is his life story up till more recent years. He had a bet years ago with Joe Hockey, who was the Treasurer of Australia at the time. Joe said to him, look, Tim, I'll run naked all around Parliament House if that railway to Darwin is ever built. Well, lo and behold, of course, Tim Fischer and an very old at the time, Gough Whitlam, a former Labor Prime Minister, was on the train. And Tim and others were in the lounge car and talking, and that subject came up. And a lady in the lounge car said, why don't you... well, actually, I understand that Joe Hockey must have got on the train at Darwin and come south, but someone can confirm whether that was a fact, but I understand it is. And the lady passenger said, look, Joe, okay, the bet is off about you don't have to run naked around Parliament House, but how about you run naked here on the Gan? Of course, everyone's laughing, and he just said, well, no, of course not, I'm not going to do that. Well, we do owe it, in closing, let's say, to Tim Fischer for his hard work in getting that Darwin line open against all the odds. And it's not getting a large amount of freight at the moment, but when you consider the future, let's talk 10 or 15 or 20 years from the future, it will play a significant, a very important role in Australia, not just for the train, which is the Gan, which I've travelled on years ago, but with freight. And by the way, Adelaide to Perth, the trains carry 70%, I believe, of all off the freight that it's offering. In other words, by road, rail, air, or to a limited degree, shipping, I guess, is used. That has a commanding. In fact, I understood that it was something up like 90% of the total. So I might stand corrected with the 70%. I think it was more like the 90%, which is utterly extraordinary when you look at it. So, all right, well, I won't get too long-winded about this. I'll just say that I personally miss Tim Fischer. Many rail enthusiasts of whatever political persuasion will offer up their condolences today, no doubt. There will be all sorts of media tributes to him, but I'm just doing this brief tribute now, and I'd just like it to go on the record. This is my personal tribute to Tim Fischer, so I thank you for viewing.